This little video is going to look at direct rule in 1972 in Northern Ireland. So a bit of background first of all. In 1972, direct rule was introduced for Northern Ireland, and basically it meant suspending the Northern Ireland Parliament, which had been running since 1921, and leaving Northern Ireland being ruled directly from the British Parliament in Westminster in London. Now, direct rule was only supposed to be a temporary solution, but would actually end up lasting over 25 years. Throughout the Troubles, with a very small exception in 1974 due to the Sunningdale Agreement. So, what are the causes? Why did the UK government impose direct rule? Well, it's imposed as a last resort by them, but there are a number of different reasons. First of all, there's the failure of interment. The Northern Ireland Parliament had made massive mistakes in the policy of interment, arresting lots of people without trial. This had proved very one-sided, deeply ineffective, and it created anger and resentment, and it fueled the violence in Northern Ireland. Secondly, you have Bloody Sunday. So on January 30th, 1972, a Niagara March was attacked in Derry by British soldiers from the Parachute Regiment. 13 civilians would be killed on that day. One extra would die later on in hospital. And clearly the nationalist and world anger was evident from these attacks. And the British government would have to act, would have to be seen to act in response to Bloody Sunday. And direct rule was part of those actions. The third cause of direct rule was the increasing violence. Northern Ireland was becoming much more violent, and this was increasing enormously due to paramilitary groups on both sides. British soldiers were now targets in the conflict, and there was increased bombings and shootings. The British government knew there needed to be a solution. And then you have Brian Faulkner's demands. The violence had caused Brian Faulkner to make increasingly strident demands, which were worrying the British government. So he wanted the RUC rearmed. He wanted a return of the B specials to the streets of Northern Ireland. And these policies would clearly raise tensions further. And the UK government knew that they weren't going to be acceptable. So direct rule was going to be the only option they could go for. And then you have Stormont simply not being acceptable by all. It was very clear to the British government that there could be no permanent solution to the Northern Ireland Troubles without having a look at power sharing, and that Stormont as a parliament was not accepted by the minority. It was based on majority rule, and you couldn't have any form of long-lasting acceptable power sharing with the present situation. So direct rule was the only option to try to work out a way forward for power sharing. So the British government reactions to this, well, British Prime Minister Edward Heath rejects Brian Faulkner's demands for the RUC to be rearmed and for the B specials to be reintroduced. And he makes a series of demands, his own demands, for the UK government to take over law and order in Northern Ireland. To Brian Faulkner, Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, this was a clear no-go issue. But Edward Heath was sticking to his guns. This is what he wanted on behalf of the UK government. So the British government announced that it was going to take control of security in Northern Ireland. Internment would be slowly ended. A Secretary of State would be appointed on behalf of the British government, a member of the cabinet, to deal with Northern Ireland. And they were going to work towards a more acceptable power sharing solution in Northern Ireland. What was the Northern Ireland government reaction to this? Well, clearly Faulkner and his unionist government were deeply angry at the British government. They believe they've been stabbed in the back, and they do not want to lose control of law and order in the province. And they resign in protest. Now, Heath knows that they are going to resign, and this is going to be part of his plan. And it's exactly what happens. So with the unionist government resigned, Edward Heath announces that the Stormont's closed and Northern Ireland is going to be ruled temporarily and directly from Westminster in London at this time. And it's going to be ruled through a Secretary of State. So the first Secretary of State for Northern Ireland would be William Whitelaw. William Whitelaw would be sent as a member of the British government to rule Northern Ireland, to be able to govern it and to be able to work a way forward with new solutions. So what are the reactions to this? Well, there are a number of reactions. Firstly, from unionists. Unionists are absolutely outraged. They regard themselves as being betrayed by the British government. Ulster Vanguard organised a huge protest rally of 100,000 people marching to Stormont. There was a strike which shut down Northern Ireland for a day. Loyalist paramilitaries increased in support and membership and violence, and the DUP began to gain much more support due to its harder line stance. Nationalists in the SDLP welcomed the actions of the British government in bringing direct rule. Direct rule from London was clearly not a permanent solution for them, but the closure of the Northern Ireland Parliament at Stormont ended majority rule and an institution they did not support. For the SDLP and the Irish government, this looked like the UK government was taking the issue seriously. It also seemed to pave the way for a much more acceptable power sharing agreement. What about the IRA? Well, Republican paramilitary groups like the Provisional IRA had mixed reactions to the direct rule. They welcomed, obviously, the end of the hated Stormont Parliament for them, which was one of their key goals, to get rid of Stormont, so that was achieved. However, this was not the United Ireland they wanted, and some believed it was their violence that actually helped them get to this spot where the British government were actually taking action. So what did they do? Well, they intensified their campaign against the British government. Sadly, direct rule didn't bring peace with it at all. 1972 would prove to be the bloodiest year of the Troubles. There would be nearly 500 deaths, just below 500 deaths. Loyalists would increase their violence, their brutal campaign fueled by anger of what had been happening and the fear of what could happen. And Republican paramilitaries exactly the same. They could sense victory after achieving one of their goals, and they believed their strategy was working and set about a devastating campaign of violence. However, in 1973 and 74, there would be moves towards the first power sharing experiment, and it's called Sunningdale. And you can look at the next video to find out what happens. Many thanks for watching.